Shalom. This is Avraham Shira from Nar Shalom. Welcome to our Friday Erev Shabbat talk. And this morning, Holy Food for Holy People, Shabbat, we're going to ask some questions that I've asked for a long time, and I hope other people ask them too, to understand a little bit more about the Kedusha of Shabbat and the Kedusha of eating on Shabbat. You know, the Jewish people have a thing with food that goes way back, and we remember the story is in the Torah about eating and where eating has lifted us up and where it's taken us down. You know, we ate at Achash Verosh's Suda, and that wasn't too good. And we asked for, fried chicken in the desert, and that wasn't too good. Actually, it was quail. We've had a relationship with food that's been very complex, and I think that's because all humanity is dealing with food on a constant basis, obviously from an economic level, from a health level, from a distribution level, and of course from the spiritual level. So food is so integrally woven into our fabric that there's no really getting away from it. And the Torah understands this and accepts that, and does not expect us to, go around with a bowl of rice every day and be satisfied. No, we say in the blessings after a meal, you will eat and you will be satisfied, and then you will bless. Now, if you look at almost all the Pesukim in the Torah, have a developmental progressive structure. You start with an idea that leads to another idea that leads to another idea. There's a reason for the order of the way words appear in verses. So always pay attention to the order of ideas in the verses of the Torah, because part of their holiness is the way the prophet says them. And it tells us first you eat, then you're satisfied, and then you can bless. Why? Well, we know that when you're satisfied and your mind is rested, then we're more able to focus on the spiritual work of making a blessing. And making a blessing is not such a small thing, because if you have a proper blessing, you could change someone's life, and that's certainly not a small thing. But if my mind is jumping to the chocolate cake in the refrigerator, or the go taste the Shabbos fish, etc., I'm not focusing on the blessing. I remember probably, that was 40 years ago, at the Chabad Yeshiva in Morristown, New Jersey. I was a newbie, Shiva newbie. I was like, didn't know anything. I walked in the door and I said, okay, go pray. And like, what's that? Well, go downstairs and get some coffee and cake. I said, well, I thought you guys aren't supposed to eat till you pray. No. They said, no, better that you eat and then pray than pray and think about food all the time. So, downstairs in the yeshiva, they had this huge table full of cake. Every morning. I said, wow, this is a good start, cake and coffee. And but actually, I think the rabbis knew what they were doing, because that little bit of eating gave the satisfaction that I could forget about food for a while and focus on prayer and connecting to Hashem to the level of speech. Of course, we can connect to Hashem to the level of food or speech or makshava or action. There are many, many ways to connect to God. Okay, so today we're going to learn some more about this idea of what is the holiness of food and how does it relate to the holiness of man. So we're going to learn a little piece from Likutei Etzot of Rabbi Nachman, and just to remind everybody that every Friday we have this talk, and next week we're going to begin a series about the Baal Shem Tov on Shabbat, and we'll learn some interesting ideas from the Baal Shem Tov for a few weeks, and then each couple of several weeks we'll focus on a different perspective of Shabbat, the different sages throughout the wonder of Jewish history. Okay, so we're in the Moedei Hashem, in the letter Vav, and it begins, Achilat Shabbat ikarav kedusha me'od. Why? Why is eating on Shabbat holier than the weekday? So when you bounce this question around, you see it's not such a simple question. It sounds like an easy answer. Well, Shabbat is holy, so the eating on Shabbat is holy. But that's not so simple, because what if a person eats in an unholy fashion on Shabbat? Is that still called holy eating? And how does this relate in Kabbalah to the structure of the worlds and the relationship of the food to the soul of man? So this question is something we're going to go into further. So the Rav continues, Ki achilat Shabbat naaseh kedusha elohut gamor, because the eating of Shabbat creates complete godliness. Below ta'arovet sigim klal, without any admixture of impurities. Now sigim are like the coal in the mountain from which you extract a diamond, or the slag from which you take out gold from the rock. It's that excess, but it's a kind of a necessary excess. Just like when you want, a walnut, you have to take off the shell. There always is this idea of klipa related to most food items. The idea of klipa, of course, is a spiritual representation of the external forces that surround the holiness. Right? There's external forces that surround all levels of holiness. Whether it's a big Knesset in the middle of a busy city, or it's a holy book on a bookshelf full of unholy books, there's always holiness is surrounded by unholiness. And it just happens to be that way. And anyways, without going too far into that, we understand here, wait a minute, the food of Shabbat is holy, godly, complete, without any excess. So, what about the guy who still eats with excess? And what about the person who drinks with excess on Shabbat? Is that still holy? So, a lot of people say, yes, that's what Rabbi Nachman meant. But it doesn't look holy. It doesn't feel holy. And you see people that get sloppy and a little bit, shall we say, coarse when they're fressing, the word in Yiddish is a good word, to fress. It doesn't mean just to eat. It means to dig in. It doesn't feel so holy. So, am I arguing with Rabbi Nachman's definition? Well, I'm asking, let's go deeper. Let's see what it's telling us. And remember this idea of the holiness being surrounded by the unholy. Just like Shabbat itself is surrounded by 6 days. 3 days after Shabbat, the Shabbat is giving over its light to the weekday. And 3 days before Shabbat, those days are drawn into the next Shabbat. And that's a Zohar that, in Tikkuni Zohar, it describes how Shabbat is like a set or circle that's surrounded by 6 other circles. And all the life force in those 6 circles comes from the middle circle. Now, geometrically, it's very interesting. If you have 7 equal-sized circles, and you put one in the middle, they will always, the relative diameter of the singular circle will be equivalent to all those 6 around it. In other words, it'll be a perfect structure, like a flower. 1 circle inside 6 of equal-sized circles. Okay. That also describes to us the weekdays, and Shabbat being the center. The Shabbat is giving over its power to the weekdays. And the Zohar is very clear to tell us that the weekdays are getting their life force from the Sudot of Shabbat. Now, how does that work? I'm sitting here on Shabbos morning eating my gefilte fish, etc., and don't forget the herring. And that's giving power to the weekdays? What do you mean? It's just a piece of fish on the table on Shabbat. How is that giving over power to the weekday? Well, when we ask that question, we have to remember that we don't understand a lot of the mystical teachings that are behind the Zohar. But it's demanding that we ask. And that's the beauty of Judaism. That Judaism does not expect you to sit quietly and just accept everything you hear. Judaism expects you to ask questions and to challenge ideas. Because how else are we going to learn and grow if we don't challenge? But of course, Judaism also teaches us the proper way to challenge. With respect, with honor, appreciation. Okay. So going forward, we see Ein chelik lasitra achara me'achilat Shabbat klal uklal, that there is no portion to the other side in the eating of Shabbat. Now the Rebbe is dayak. He's very precise with his words. He doesn't say there's no chelik of the other side in the food. He says there's no other side connected to the eating of the food. Now food is a living entity. It has spiritual kiyum. It's existing in a frame of power. That food has the power to give you life. And that power to restore you from eating is a godly process. Because you can stuff $1,000 bills in your mouth and you're not going to live too long. But you can live a long time on apples, etc., etc. So the power in food is something that's invested by nature from the earth, and through the life force that's in the earth, we absorb life force into our bodies. So when we talk about Achilat Shabbat, are we talking about food or a human being? Well, Achilat Shabbat means the eating of Shabbat. Food doesn't eat, human beings eat. So we're really talking about the human beings. We're not talking about the food itself. When we talk about the human beings, that the eating on Shabbat, it doesn't have any other side, would imply that you can eat, 14 pieces of pizza and be fine on Shabbat and not suffer. Now, don't try this, please. Maybe 4 pieces, but not 14. But nonetheless, wait a minute. This seems to contradict. The other side, we always think of the other side in Kabbalah as the exaggeration of the good. The exaggeration of Tov is Ra. There is no such thing as Ra until you exaggerate Tov. Evil is just the exaggeration of goodness. And that's what we're here to fix, all those exaggerations. As the rabbis teach, someone who has 100 wants 200. Someone who has 1,000,000 wants 2,000,000. It's the exaggeration that causes all the problems in this world. And I'm sure you can extrapolate that concept to anything in the physical realm. But nonetheless, the eating of Shabbat has no other side. But we know food does have the other side. That the shell of a walnut will kill you if you try to eat it. All things being equal. Right? And so that's called the other side because it's dangerous. It's not the walnut that you're after. It's the package that it comes in. Or the rind of fruits, or the bones of animals. All these things are not good for us for a reason. Well, you could say, well, Avraham, it's just physiologically obvious that if you eat bones too much, they're going to poke holes in your stomach and it's not going to be a pretty picture. Okay, that's true, but we're talking about the relative structures of items. That there's a part of the animal we can eat and a part we cannot eat. And there's a part of the fruit and the part of the vegetable, etc., etc. Those parts that we can't eat are necessary. But in relation to the holiness of the food that we're after and the spark of God in the food, which remember is the pure desire itself. Someone was trying to make fun of me once and they showed me a chocolate cake. They said, Avraham, where's the spark of holiness in this cake? And he was like, he was a young student and he's a good guy, but a little bit chutzpahdik, And I looked at the cake and I understood and I smiled. I said, well, actually, there is no spark in this food. He says, how do you know? I said, because I don't want it. So that's a secret, my friends. Your wanting the thing is a sign that there is a spark in it for you. And the spark might be holy and it might have an admixture to it. When you say, I want that donut, and you're not able to eat sugar, then that spark is a fallen spark of holiness. Because another person who can handle sugar, it's fine. Doesn't hurt them. But a person who can't handle sugar, then that sugar is now been converted to the other side. So what I was really trying to communicate nicely to this fellow is that the spark of holiness is our connection to the food. In halacha of Shabbat, it's called the zikah. That there's it's kind of, a spark is a metaphoric term, right? But the idea is that a spark is like, when you strike an anvil with a hammer and you get sparks. It's really, that spark is an extraction from steel on steel, hitting each other and creating heat and ejecting a tiny filament, if you will, of steel that's been so hot it turns into a spark. But if you took that spark and you looked at it under you let it cool and looked at it under a microscope, you would find steel attached to it. So also in the realm of spirituality, your connection to the thing is the essential part of Hashem that's looking to jump levels, right? The food is designed to jump levels inside you, all things being equal. Okay, so this idea of eating of Shabbat is holy, there's no other side, means that I'm not going to get drawn into excess unless it's so ingrained in me, the excess. I'm trying to think of another example of this. I know people that drink, vodka on Shabbat, and they enjoy it. They have one or two, they feel good, it warms their heart, they start to talk, they get friendly even, But during the week, they don't have vodka. It doesn't pull them at all. But on Shabbat, there's a spark there. What happens? Why? Why don't they want the vodka during the week? Because they're not sitting with their friends in shul on a Shabbos morning? Well, that might be part of it, but it's not so simple, because the item itself is not what we're talking about. We're talking about the relationship to the item. That on Shabbat, a person who is drawn to something is not necessarily drawn to the excess of the thing. And that is the Sitra Achara. However, a person who's an alcoholic, who's going to drink vodka every day, and probably more than one or two, so that person is off the scale. That person is in the grip of the other side completely when it comes to drinking. So this equation where the Rebbe's talking about Ein Sitra Achara b'kedushat achila, in the holiness of eating, it means that we're not pulled to excess by the item itself. A person who goes towards excess is because his body has already been conditioned for that. And this is true for all things. Okay? And there are pre-existing conditions in people's bodies that make them susceptible to things like eating too much or drinking too much or speaking too much, for that matter. Now, a person who speaks too much, you see those kind of guys that they just, at shul, they got to talk, and especially at Kiddush, and they have a couple of l'chaims and they're really off. And they forget that everybody else wants to talk to, and everybody else has a divrei Torah or a story. And that's part of the chen, the beauty, the grace of Shabbat, is to sit with your friends and I don't have to worry about Sunday or Monday or Friday or my boss or anything else. I'm in Shabbat. I'm above time and space. I'm with Hashem. I'm with fellow Jews. And so that chen of Shabbat brings out this deeper part of ourselves, this sociability, if you will. It's supposed to. Again, all things being equal, if you just had a fight with your wife before you went to shul, it might be hard to sit there and be calm at Shabbos Kiddush. But nonetheless, it's the hergel in Hebrew is regularity. The habit of a thing is not is already an exaggeration. It's reached a level where it's not the Sitra Achara, the other side here, that the Rebbe's talking about. Right? And really what it means is that Shabbat we have proportion. We have balance between ourselves and the world. That's really what we're after. That on the weekday, it's not shaykh to sit and drink vodka. because it's an exaggeration of what the weekday is about. But on Shabbat, when Shabbat is about sharing and connecting and appreciating each other, sometimes we need a little help, a little warmer upper, And so that change is exactly where we can see the difference between the holiness of eating or drinking on Shabbat versus the unholiness, or if you will, the excess that is not called for, the extra item that's not necessary. Ki achilat Shabbat kodesh hu kulo elukut kulo kodesh, because the eating of Shabbat is all holy and all godly. Now that's the nature of God, is not to exaggerate. God is emet, Hashem hu emet. The nature of Hashem is not to exaggerate one iota in anything. Because if you're creating an atom and you exaggerate with one extra electron, you change the structure of the entire atom. And that could create havoc in the universe. It's mind-blowing if you think about the perfect balance that Hashem conducts the world. And that's part of the way we see Him. We see the presence of Hashem is this presence of perfect balance of all things. And we've learned as a race, as the human beings has grown in science, we've learned how our behavior has affected ecosystems and affected social systems and affected nations. And, well, we see what's going on in the world now. So the exaggeration is where we find the other side begins, the Sitra Achara. It's like a salesman who comes on too strong. He's starting to push too hard. That should tell us something about this transaction per se, let's say. So, going a little further with the Rebbe, he tells us another secret. Aidei achilat Shabbat nichna nitbatel lakas. Oh, this is important, folks. By eating holy Shabbos meals, we actually subdue anger. Now, some people have a problem with anger in their nature. There are 4 elements in creation: air, earth, water, and fire. And fire is related to anger. And if a person is a fire-based soul, he's going to lean towards anger. And if a person is a water-based soul, he's going to lean towards desires, physical desires, eating, sex, etc. If a person is an earth-based soul, he's going to lean towards being quiet, subdued, maybe even sad, even depressed. A person who's air-based is a person that leans towards excessive speech, which, of course, speech is a very important thing in holiness and in Torah. So anyways, a person who has a fire-based system, he's going to naturally get angry easier. It's just, we say the guy's got a short fuse. But not everybody has a short fuse because they were born with it. Maybe because they were around other angry people growing up. Or maybe because things happened to them in their life that made them angry. They didn't understand the presence of Hashem in every single event that happens to every single person in every single place of all throughout history. That's kind of a large thing to swallow, All reality is God and His divine providence. It's easy to say, but it's another thing altogether to believe and live it. So when a person gets angry, it's because usually he doesn't understand. But look here, the Rebbe tells us a secret. When we eat on Shabbat, we subdue anger. And I've seen it in myself, and I've seen it in others. There's something about Shabbat, you don't want to get angry. There's some potion in the air that protects us from that anger. Because anger is the most devastating of all sins. Because anger means I'm rejecting reality as God is making it at this very moment. And if I'm angry, I'm telling God, you know what? You exist and I exist. And God says, oh really? You're separate from me? How'd that happen? I made you, I created you from beginning to end, and now you're telling me you're separate? Okay, let's see how you do separate. A person gets angry very easily like this. When a person understands that Hashem sends me my emotions like a guy who's pushing a joystick around on a go-kart. The emotions are God's way of kind of trying to direct our go-kart. You know those bumper cars in Coney Island? You must have been there or somewhere, right? Those little, you're directing the thing, you're bouncing off people. But that's Hashem, how He kind of guides us through our emotions. And he sometimes He makes us angry because we need to get angry, and sometimes He makes us angry because He's telling you exaggerated, and this is the results of your actions. Because there is a thing called causing anger in heaven. But when we eat on Shabbat, the anger goes down, we get calmer, we filter things better. We see things through a brighter lens. And so this is a gift of Shabbat. Because as you know, if you've been around people on Friday, you see Friday is a day when oftentimes people get into arguments. Friday is a time where the Yetzer Hara is getting more excited because he knows he's going to lose on Shabbos. He's going to be kicked out of the stadium on Shabbos. There's no Yetzer Hara. He's not allowed to operate. Now we see people do, but it's not because of the general. Because there's a general Yetzer Hara over the whole world, and there's a Yetzer Hara all over every person. Now they're allied, they're friends, believe me, they're well connected. But a person can lose it on Shabbat, he can have a meltdown, but it's not to say that the Yetzer Hara is dancing on everybody's head during Shabbat. No, he's outside the picture. So when we hear the sages teach something like this, there's no Sitra Achara in the eating of Shabbat. It's to be taken with a broader understanding of the large picture of the world, and the individual picture of the world still exists. If a person does things that are against the Torah, guess who gets angry? The Shekhinah gets hurt. We hurt the divine presence when we don't do the right things. That's hard to swallow, but Rabbi Nachman has a whole Torah on it. Someday, God willing, we'll learn it together. Where what a glory it is when God shows us the pain of the Shekhinah. And how does He do it? Through our own pain. And when I do something, when a person does something that causes pain above, guess what? He gets a little bit down here. Maybe more than a little bit. So, Shabbat is a time of blessing, of grace, of peace, of rest. And you notice that how many people take a nap every afternoon? I don't know. Not so many that I know of. Who can take a nap every day of the week? You got to stay at work. Shabbat, everybody seems to want to go take a nap. Is it just the cholent? All those potatoes and beans and chuck roast? I don't know if it's just the cholent. I think that the Arizal has a whole little paragraph about sleeping on Shabbat and how it's good for the soul, whereas during the weekday it is not a good thing to sleep in the afternoon. Because we're inducing the katnut, it's called, the small-mindedness that comes into a person when he sleeps into the weekday afternoon. We don't want to do that. Sleeping at night is enough. But on Shabbat, that katnut is gone. Now you might wake up groggy or fuzzy because you had too much to eat at the second meal, but the Shabbat eating is not really supposed to do that to us. And that's really the secret of holy eating. That holy people know when to stop. They know when to put down the fork. And, I could tell you, when you put down the fork at the right time, the food is another thing completely. Then you really sense the holiness in the food. Because I'm not eating it for my physical pleasure. I'm eating it for spiritual pleasure. And the real moment is that first sense of satisfaction. It's not being stuffed. It's not being overstuffed. It's not even being full. It's that click that happens in your heart when the hunger is gone. Let's say you sit down to eat. You have hunger. You waited all morning, you daven, you haven't had breakfast. Like most weekdays, people go to daven and they get up to come home and eat something. Or they, like I said, in Morristown, we used to eat the cake before davening. Fine. Every custom in Judaism has a basis in halakha or in Chassidut. But on Shabbat, you can taste easier that moment of satisfaction. And when you have that moment of satisfaction, put the fork down. Take a break. Experience that shift from hunger to peace. Because satisfaction is really the induction of peace in my body. I no longer want the thing. That's where the holiness is. Now, I can have a few more bites. But you will notice, after that moment of satisfaction, it starts to go downhill a little bit. And that's why Shlomo HaMelech said, Tzaddik ochel lesova nafsho. The righteous person eats to satisfy his soul. And the soul is telling you when it needs food by making you hungry. But I'm not talking about that hunger for my pizza and the other guy's pizza. I'm talking about just enough to cause the hunger to leave. And it's an exercise. It's a practice. And it's something that it's good to do alone, because we kind of have a way of influencing each other at meals. They're eating, I'll eat. Oh, there's more. The balabayit put out some more food. Oh, I'll eat more. See, that's always true, right? Especially at the Kiddush at Shul. It's so funny. You know, everybody's satisfied. Everybody had enough. The vodka and the beer and the cake and the herring, everything. It's all good. The kugel. How much kugel can you eat? They bring out a new kugel, all of a sudden we're digging. Those forks come out like shovels. But that's not the holiness. That's not ochel lesova nafsho. To eating for the satisfaction of your soul means it's just what I need. No more. Because I want to stay at that fine line of sensitivity. Because that's where I can experience the holiness of eating. It's a practice, and we got to pray for it too. God, help us eat with holiness. Because the food itself doesn't have the sitra achara attached to it. Right? The food on Shabbos doesn't have that shell of excess. And we don't want it either. So I bless all of us to experience that a little bit, and then we'll know why the rabbis are perfect in what they say, because they have lived through it. You know, they didn't put your name in the Talmud because you happen to be in the right school at the right time. They put your name in the Talmud because you lived the ideas of the Talmud. And so on and so forth, that these holy people are the foundation of who we are and how we got to be here at all. So God bless you all with a holy Shabbos, with holy eating, with consciousness, with sensitivity to the food. You know, something gave its life for you to eat that food. That little chicken gave its life for you. Let's be nice. To the memory of the chicken. You know, here in Bad Ayin, you know, people do their own shechita sometimes, and you're literally eating animals that you raised. It's a different experience, my friends. You have appreciation food in a much different way than when you go to the frozen meat section at the supermarket. That's also part of it, that sensitivity to the life that is in front of us, that we are partaking of life, and in order that we can praise the creator of all life. God bless you all. Have a great Shabbat. We'll see you next week on our morning mini class, and on our Patreon website. Come and visit us. See what we have to offer. There's some wonderful, exciting things coming up. Next week we're going to begin a series on money and God, the currency of the universe. And we're going to learn some secrets about money. And hopefully it'll help us fix our relationship to money, which is no simple thing. Whether you have it or don't have it, it's a complicated relationship. So God bless all of you. Shabbat Shalom. And we'll see you next week.